I am 54 years old, and for the last 15 years, my life has been measured in uptime. If you have never stood in a Tier 3 data center at 3 in the morning, let me explain. It is a freezing fortress of steel and silicon, row after row of server racks kept at 68 degrees by industrial cooling units. The noise is a constant hum that rattles your teeth. When you hear that hum, it means the banks are processing transactions and the world is turning the way it should. My name is David. I was the operations manager for Apex Colocation in West Texas. I built that facility from a dusty concrete shell holding 50 racks into a 4,000 square foot fortress boasting 99.999% uptime. I knew every inch of that building. I knew the exact vibration the backup generators made before a fuel filter needed swapping. I gave my prime years to Marcus, the owner of Apex. Marcus and I were in the trenches together back in the early days. We pulled Cat6 cables through drop ceilings until our fingers bled. I trusted the man. When he told me my sweat equity would pay off, I took him at his word. That trust was tested 3 weeks ago, during one of the worst ice storms Texas had seen in a decade. The state power grid folded like a cheap card table. The main feed to our facility died instantly. For 72 straight hours, I lived in that building. When the transfer switch on generator 2 failed, I ran into freezing rain, cracked open the housing, and bridged the contacts with a heavy pry bar to get the massive diesel roaring. I slept on a cot for 4 hours total, waking up every 60 minutes to monitor ambient temperatures in the hot aisles. We did not drop a single packet. Every client stayed online. When the grid came back, Marcus hugged me in the hallway. He called me a miracle worker. He scheduled a meeting for the following Monday, hinting heavily we would discuss my future and ensure I was compensated for saving the company from millions in liability. I walked into the glass-walled conference room, expecting a vice president title and an equity stake. I was holding a leather folio with my proposed infrastructure upgrades for Q3. Marcus was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, but he was not alone. Leaning back in an ergonomic chair, scrolling through a brand new iPhone, was his 26-year-old son, Julian. Julian had just graduated with an MBA from an expensive private university. He possessed that unearned arrogance that only comes from knowing your last name is on the building. I took a seat, and Marcus cleared his throat. He could not look me in the eye. David, Marcus started, his voice lacking the warmth from days prior. Incredible job with the storm, truly, but we are at a pivot point with Apex. We need to look at the operation through a modern lens. The board and I feel it is time to bring in fresh blood to modernize our operational strategy. Julian set his phone face down and leaned forward. "I will take this one, Dad," he said, flashing a shark-like smile. "David, we appreciate your boots-on-the-ground mentality, but the landscape is changing. We need aggressive cost-cutting. We need synergy. Frankly, your approach to operations is bloated. You overspend on preventative maintenance. You keep too much redundant staff on the payroll." I stared at the kid, stunned. "Bloated?" I asked, my voice rising a fraction. "Those redundancies in maintenance schedules are why we did not go offline last week when the county went dark. You cannot cut corners on Tier 3 infrastructure. It violates our service level agreements." Julian waved his hand dismissively. "Those SLAs are just paper, David. It is all about risk tolerance. We are restructuring. Effective immediately, I am stepping in as Director of Operations. I will handle all vendor contracts, staffing, and facility management." I looked at Marcus. He was staring out the window. "You are giving my job to your son? A kid who does not know the difference between a cooling tower and a server rack?" "It is a corporate decision, David," Marcus muttered weakly. Julian stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "We are not letting you go. Dad insisted we keep you around for your historical knowledge. We are transitioning you to a new role. Compliance Archivist." I blinked. "Compliance Archivist? What is that?" "You will be auditing historical vendor logs and digitizing old maintenance records," Julian explained, entirely too pleased with himself. "Your salary will be adjusted down by 30% to reflect the new market rate for this clerical role. Your new workspace is already set up. They were trying to make me quit, strip a veteran employee of his dignity, slash his pay, and shove him in a corner until he leaves on his own accord, saving the company a severance package. My first instinct was to flip the table and walk out the front door. At 54 years old, you do not just walk away from a job without a backup plan. I had a mortgage, and deep down, a cold part of my brain clicked into place. I realized Julian was going to destroy this facility. He was going to cut the wrong corner, and everything I built was going to crash down around him. I wanted to be there to watch it happen. I slowly closed my leather folio. I stood up, pushed my chair back in, and looked Julian dead in the eyes. "Where's my new office?" Julian smirked, handing me a single brass key. "Downstairs, sub-level 2, past the loading dock." 10 minutes later, I was standing in front of my new domain. It was a windowless concrete closet that smelled of floor wax and ozone. Someone had shoved a wobbly folding table against the back wall and placed a dusty 5-year-old laptop on it. Next to the table were 40 cardboard boxes filled with greasy, faded maintenance receipts. The dull rumble of the freight elevator echoed through the cinder block walls. I walked inside, flicked on the flickering fluorescent overhead light, and gently closed the heavy metal door behind me. I sat down in the squeaky plastic folding chair, placed my hands flat on the table, and took a long, deep breath. If Julian wanted to play games with my life, I was more than ready to play along. For the first 2 weeks, I actually did the job Julian gave me. I sat in my windowless concrete box on sub-level 2, surrounded by the smell of floor wax and ozone, and I digitized old maintenance records. I scanned 40 boxes of greasy vendor invoices, cooling tower repair tickets, and generator fuel receipts. It was mindless, degrading work designed to break my spirit. Instead, it gave me unrestricted access to the complete financial and operational history of Apex Colocation. Because Julian was a 26-year-old kid playing businessman, he did not understand how data centers actually operated on a legal level. While scanning a stack of compliance documents from 3 years ago, I started reading the actual fine print on our core contracts. I looked at the state vendor licenses, the FEMA disaster continuity grants, and the strict service-level agreements we held with the regional hospital network. Every single one of those contracts contained a highly specific technical rider. They mandated that the facility maintain a named master operations engineer or a licensed site reliability operator on the payroll to guarantee emergency response times. The name typed on every single one of those multi-million-dollar contracts was David. I was the only licensed site reliability operator in a 200-mile radius. Without my specific credentials attached to the facility, Apex was legally prohibited from hosting Tier 3 medical data or securing federal emergency grants. If I had walked out the door that first day like Julian wanted, Marcus would have been in breach of contract before my brake lights hit the highway. But they had kept me on the payroll, hiding me in a closet, totally unaware that my mere presence was the only thread keeping them out of federal court. I kept my mouth shut and kept scanning. Meanwhile, Julian began his crusade to modernize operations. His first disaster arrived via a company-wide email on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read OPEX Optimization Initiative. Julian announced he was raising the ambient temperature in all server halls from 68 degrees to 78 degrees. He linked a 5-year-old Facebook engineering white paper explaining how hyperscale data centers run hotter to save on HVAC electricity costs. I immediately drafted a professional email outlining exactly why that was a catastrophic idea. I explained that while hyperscale server farms use custom-built hardware designed for high heat, our facility was filled with legacy Dell and HP servers owned by our colocation clients. Those machines were not built to suck 78-degree air through their intake fans. I told him the thermal throttling would cripple performance, and the drives would start failing within 6 months. I hit send. Julian replied 4 minutes later. The entire email was one word: noted. By Thursday, the ambient temperature on the main floor hit 78 degrees. Sitting in my basement closet, I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of 1,000 server fans spinning up to their maximum RPM, desperately trying to cool themselves. The HVAC savings were instantly wiped out by the servers drawing maximum wattage just to run their fans. It was a completely unforced error, but I just printed out his email and slipped it into a manila folder. Julian was just getting started. The following week, a Friday passed without the building shaking. For 15 years, every single Friday at noon, we ran a full load test on the massive backup diesel generators. It is a mandatory procedure to ensure the engine block heaters are working and the fuel lines are not clogged. I checked the digital operations log. Julian had canceled the weekly tests permanently. His attached note claimed the noise pollution was upsetting a new artisan coffee shop that opened across the street. He changed the testing schedule to an annual review. A data center that does not test its generators weekly is just a ticking time bomb waiting for a thunderstorm. I printed that log entry too. Then came the vendor cuts. Our fire suppression system was a highly complex network of FM200 gas deployment nozzles. If a server caught fire, the system would suck the oxygen out of the room and drop the gas to extinguish the flame without using water that would destroy the hardware. Maintaining it cost $12,000 a month, handled by a specialized firm called Advanced Fire Protection. I was reviewing the digital accounts payable ledger when I noticed Advanced Fire Protection had been formally terminated. In their place, Julian had signed a $2,000 a month retainer with a company called Jim's Fire and Lawn. I actually had to rub my eyes and read it twice. Jim's Fire and Lawn was a local landscaping company that occasionally recharged commercial fire extinguishers on the side. Julian had fired specialized chemical engineers and hired a guy who drove a riding mower to maintain a life-saving gas suppression system. It was not just negligent, it was borderline criminal. I started a quiet, encrypted spreadsheet on my personal thumb drive. Every reckless memo, every ignored warning, every canceled maintenance contract. I documented the rising temperatures, the generator neglect, and the landscaper managing our fire systems. I was building a comprehensive timeline of operational malpractice. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, a calendar reminder popped up on my dusty laptop screen. It was an automated alert I had set up 2 years ago, back when I actually ran the building. The State Fire Marshal annual compliance attestation was due in exactly 14 days. In the state of Texas, operating a high-density server facility requires a sworn, notarized affidavit confirming that all fire suppression and emergency power systems are maintained to state's code. Failing to file the attestation results in an immediate revocation of the certificate of occupancy. I opened the digital form and scrolled down to the signature block. The state did not want the owner's signature. They did not want the CEO's signature. They legally required the sworn signature of the facility's licensed site reliability operator. I stared at the blinking cursor. Julian had fired the real fire inspectors. He had canceled the generator tests. The facility was currently operating in massive violation of state fire codes. And Julian could not sign the legal attestation to keep the doors open. He needed my signature to commit felony fraud on his behalf. I leaned back in my squeaky plastic chair and smiled in the dark. Julian realized he had a problem on a Thursday, just 3 days before the state fire marshal deadline. My desk phone in the sub-level closet rang for the first time in a month. It was Julian's executive assistant, telling me I was needed in the director's office immediately. I walked upstairs to the main administrative wing. Julian had taken over my old office, completely gutting the functional layout. He replaced my drafting table with a glass desk, installed a putting green, and added a $3,000 espresso machine. He was practicing his golf putt when I walked in. "David, glad you could make it up from the dungeon," Julian said. He sank the golf ball into the return cup. "Listen, I have a minor administrative hurdle. The state needs this annual fire compliance attestation signed by the close of business tomorrow. It requires the licensed site reliability operator on staff. That is you. I forwarded the digital form to your inbox. Just open it, apply your digital signature, and send it back to me." I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. "I read it this morning, Julian. I am not signing it." Julian stopped smiling. He leaned on his putter. "What do you mean you are not signing it?" "It is a routine document. Just click the button." "There is nothing routine about it," I replied, keeping my voice entirely neutral. "By signing that document, I am swearing under penalty of perjury the facility is operating up to state safety codes." "We are not. You raised the ambient temperature in the server halls to 78 degrees, pushing the hardware to the brink of a thermal event. You canceled the mandatory weekly load tests on the backup generators. We do not even know if they will start in an emergency. and you fired specialized chemical engineers to hire Jim's Fire and Lawn to maintain an industrial gas suppression system. If I sign that paper, I am committing fraud. Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of red. He threw the putter onto the carpet. You work for me, David. You will do exactly what I tell you to do. If you do not sign that form by 5 p.m., you are fired. I will terminate your contract for insubordination, and you will not see a dime of severance. I looked at him for a long moment. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. Fire me then, I said. I turned around and walked out of the office, heading straight back to my concrete closet. I waited for the termination email all afternoon. It never came. The next morning, I logged onto the secure facility server. As a former administrator, I still had read access to the master document portal. I navigated to the compliance folder and checked the status of the state fire marshal attestation. The status icon had changed from pending to submitted. My heart hammered against my ribs. I downloaded the submitted PDF and scrolled down to the final page. There, sitting neatly on the signature line, was my exact digital signature. Below it was a timestamp from 8 p.m. the previous night. Julian had logged into the administrative console, bypassed the user authentication protocols, and forced my digital signature onto the state document. I stared at the screen, a cold realization washing over me. This was not just corporate negligence anymore. Under Texas law, forging a signature on a government compliance document was a felony. Legally speaking, the document was void ab initio, meaning it had zero legal standing. Julian had just handed me the nuclear launch keys to his entire life. I did not panic, and I definitely did not confront him. Instead, I methodically took high-resolution screenshots of the forged document. I pulled the server access logs, showing Julian's IP address logging in and applying the signature. I downloaded every single byte of evidence and copied it onto my encrypted thumb drive. The following morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. and drove my truck to a Waffle House on the edge of the county line. I slid into a sticky vinyl booth in the back corner. Waiting for me were two people who held the future of Apex in their hands. The first was Gary, the senior facilities manager for the regional hospital network. Gary and I had worked together for 10 years. He was the guy managing the massive Tier 3 medical data contracts that kept Apex profitable. The second was Alina. Alina was an aggressive infrastructure investor from Dallas. For the last 14 months, her firm had been building a state-of-the-art data center 5 miles down the highway. It was a beautiful facility, built from the ground up for modern hyperscale and legacy colocation alike. But she needed an anchor tenant to open the doors, and she needed a veteran operator to run the floor. The waitress poured us 3 mugs of black coffee and left us alone. I pulled out my laptop and turned the screen so they could both see it. Gary, I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee, Apex is currently running your servers at 78 degrees to save on their power bill. They are not testing the backup generators, and their fire suppression system is currently being managed by a landscaping company. Gary stared at the screen, his face turning pale. The hospital's patient records are on those servers, David. If a thermal event takes us offline, people could literally die. We have a strict service level agreement. This is a massive breach. I nodded. It gets worse. I pulled up the forged state fire marshal document. Julian forged my signature to keep the certificate of occupancy. When the state finds out, they will red tag the building and cut the commercial power. Apex will go dark. Alina leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with predatory interest. How long do we have? I closed the laptop. I have a proposition for you both. Alina, you need an anchor tenant and an operations director for your new facility. Gary, you need to migrate your medical data out of Apex before Julian burns the building down. Alina smiled. If you bring the hospital contract to my facility, David, I will make you the vice president of operations. We will start migrating the servers tonight. I looked at Gary. He did not even hesitate. Let's do it, he said. I took another sip of coffee, mapping out the timeline in my head. We have 3 days to quietly mirror the data to Alina's servers. We dropped the hammer on Monday. Why Monday? Alina asked, raising an eyebrow. Because on Monday at noon, Marcus and Julian are hosting a massive walkthrough with private equity investors, I said, smiling. They are trying to sell the company based on Julian's optimized financials. I think the investors should know exactly what they are buying. The data migration started on Friday night at 9 p.m. Transferring a Tier 3 medical database without triggering internal network alarms requires a delicate touch. Because I designed the network architecture at Apex 8 years ago, I knew exactly how to throttle the bandwidth to keep the data spike hidden from Julian's rudimentary monitoring software. I sat in my concrete closet all weekend, drinking stale coffee and coordinating the encrypted transfer over a secure dark fiber line. Over the course of 48 hours, petabytes of patient records, surgical schedules, and billing data flowed out of the overheating Dell servers on the main floor and into Alina's brand-new, climate-controlled hyperscale facility 5 miles down the road. By 11 p.m. on Sunday, the mirror was complete. The hospital network was officially running live on Alina's infrastructure. Gary drafted a formal breach of contract termination notice, set it on a digital timer, and went to sleep. Monday morning arrived with a palpable electrical charge. At 10 a.m., 6 private equity investors walked through the front doors of Apex Colocation. They wore bespoke suits and carried thin leather briefcases. Marcus and Julian greeted them in the lobby with aggressive handshakes and wide, confident smiles. I slipped into the back of the glass-walled conference room before the meeting started, taking a seat in the far corner. I had a single manila folder resting on my lap. Julian stood at the head of the mahogany table, clicking through a glossy presentation on the massive projector screen. He was in his element, radiating unearned confidence. He showed them graphs with steep upward trajectories. He boasted about how he had fundamentally revolutionized the colocation business model in just 4 weeks. As you can see on page 12 of your packets, Julian said, flashing his shark-like smile at the lead investor, we have drastically reduced our operating expenses. The old regime was crippled by bloat. We were overpaying for preventative maintenance and relying on expensive, unnecessary vendor contracts. I stepped in and aggressively cut that legacy dead weight. We optimized the ambient cooling temperatures, eliminated redundant generator testing, and restructured our fire suppression retainers. The result is a 40% increase in our EBITDA margin without sacrificing a single drop of performance. Marcus beamed with pride from the sidelines. The lead investor adjusted his glasses. That is an impressive reduction in OPEX, Julian. But data centers are a high-risk real estate class. How are you maintaining your state safety compliance and service-level agreements with these aggressive cuts? Julian waved his hand dismissively. Compliance is just paperwork. We have an incredibly robust automated safety system, and our compliance officer handles all the bureaucratic red tape to keep the state happy. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. The state fire marshal walked in. He was a broad-shouldered man in a crisp khaki uniform, flanked by 2 armed local police officers. The room instantly fell dead silent. The investors shifted uncomfortably in their ergonomic chairs. Who is in charge of this facility? The marshal barked, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Marcus stepped forward, his confident smile faltering. I am the owner. Is there a problem, officer? The marshal ignored him, holding up a printed copy of the annual compliance attestation. The state received this sworn affidavit on Thursday night. It certifies that the emergency backup generators and the FM gas fire suppression systems have been fully inspected and are operating to state code. However, my office received an anonymous tip this morning containing vendor termination records indicating that your certified fire suppression engineers were fired a month ago. Julian swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. There must be a misunderstanding. We have a licensed site reliability operator on staff. He handles all of our safety protocols. Julian pointed directly at me in the back of the room. That is him, David. If there is a discrepancy with the paperwork, you need to talk to him. He signed it. Every eye in the conference room turned to look at me. I stood up slowly, picking up my manila folder. That is an interesting accusation, Julian, I said. My voice calm and steady. Especially since you demoted me to compliance archivist 4 weeks ago, moved my desk to a basement closet, and cut my salary by 30%. I have zero operational authority in this building. I walked to the front of the room and handed the open folder to the fire marshal. I did not sign that document, I continued, looking directly at the investors. Julian forged my digital signature. What you are holding in that folder are the server access logs. They show Julian's specific administrative IP address, logging into the compliance portal at 8 p.m. on Thursday. They show him bypassing the two-factor authentication protocols. And they show him applying my digital signature to that state document. The fire marshal reviewed the printed logs, his jaw tightening. Under Texas Penal Code Section 37.10, tampering with a governmental record is a felony, I said, making sure my voice carried across the silent room. That document is void ab initio. It has zero legal standing. The lead investor did not say a word. He just closed his leather packet, stood up, and walked out of the room. The other 5 investors immediately followed him, not even looking at Marcus as they left. The multi-million-dollar buyout evaporated in less than 10 seconds. Marcus looked like he was going to have a heart attack. He grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, gasping for air. "Julian, tell me he is lying. Tell me you did not forge a state document." Julian was frozen, staring at the server logs in the marshal's hand. I just needed the signature, Dad. It was just a formality." The fire marshal turned to the 2 police officers. "Secure the lobby. Nobody leaves the premises until I conduct interviews." He turned back to Marcus and Julian, his eyes cold and hard. "A forged safety attestation is legally void. That means this facility is currently operating high-voltage equipment and dense thermal loads with zero valid fire compliance on record. Effective immediately, I am revoking your certificate of occupancy. Shut down the servers. I am ordering an immediate evacuation of this building." The fire marshal's order hung in the stagnant air of the conference room like a physical weight. Shut down the servers. Those 4 words meant total operational death for a co-location facility. Julian's eyes widened in absolute panic. He stepped toward the marshal, raising his hands in a frantic, pleading gesture. "You cannot do that. You cannot just cut the power to the main floor. We have Tier 3 medical data on those racks. We host the entire regional hospital network. If you pull the plug without a proper spin-down sequence, you will corrupt the databases. Patients will literally die. You will be responsible for a medical catastrophe." The fire marshal did not even blink. He looked at Julian with the cold, immovable authority of a man who had seen too many burning buildings. "My jurisdiction is life safety, son," the marshal said evenly, "not information technology. You are currently operating a massive thermal load in a sealed environment with zero legal fire suppression. That makes this building a ticking incinerator." "I am not asking you. I am telling you." The marshal gestured to the 2 police officers standing by the door. "Escort the facility staff to the main breaker room. We are killing the commercial feed right now." Marcus sank slowly into one of the ergonomic leather chairs. He buried his face in his hands. The blood had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking 10 years older in a matter of seconds. He was a veteran businessman. He knew exactly what was happening. The investors were gone. The state was shutting them down. The civil liability for dropping the hospital network would bankrupt him, and his son was going to a federal penitentiary. It was total, unmitigated ruin. Just as the police officers moved to secure the room, the glass doors opened one last time. Gary walked in. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and carrying a thick legal envelope. He walked past the armed officers without a second glance, stepping right up to the mahogany table. He looked down at Marcus. "Marcus," Gary said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy, "I am officially serving you with a formal notice of termination for breach of contract, effective immediately." Gary dropped the heavy envelope onto the table. It landed with a loud final thud. Julian grabbed his own hair, his voice cracking hysterically. "Are you insane, Gary? We are in the middle of a massive state emergency. The fire marshal is about to pull the power on your servers. Your entire hospital network is going to crash." Gary turned to look at the terrified 26-year-old kid. "No, Julian," he said calmly. "It is not." Gary pointed a thumb over his shoulder. "Over the last 48 hours, we executed our emergency disaster recovery protocols. Due to your gross negligence regarding the ambient temperature and the fire suppression systems, we determined Apex was no longer a viable or safe environment for critical medical data. 100% of our network was securely mirrored and migrated to a Tier 4 hyperscale facility 5 miles down the road." Marcus slowly lowered his hands, looking up at Gary in shock. "Migrated? How? You cannot just migrate petabytes of data over a weekend without tripping our internal network alarms. It is impossible. Gary did not answer. He just looked across the room at me. Marcus followed his gaze. He stared at me standing quietly in the corner. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He saw the whole picture. He saw the throttled bandwidth, the quiet weekend hours, and the trap that had been patiently laid for his arrogant son. "David," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling, 15 years. We built this place together. Why would you destroy it?" I looked at the man who used to be my friend. "You destroyed it." "Marcus, I just stepped out of the way to let it fall. You let a kid with a spreadsheet and a $3,000 suit tell you how to run a Tier 3 data center. You compromised the safety of the facility to save a few pennies on the margins, and then you shoved me in a basement closet to try and force me out of my severance. You broke the cardinal rule of operations. You cut the wrong corner." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single brass key Julian had given me a month ago. I tossed it underhand. It hit the mahogany table and slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop right in front of Julian. "Good luck with the paperwork," I said. I turned around and walked out of the glass conference room. I walked past the police officers, out the front doors, and into the bright, blinding Texas sunlight. I climbed into my truck, rolled down the windows, and drove away without looking in the rear-view mirror. 6 months later, my life looks a lot different. I am currently sitting in a massive corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. I am the vice president of operations for Alina's new data center. It is a stunning state-of-the-art Tier 4 hyperscale facility. The server halls are kept at a perfect crisp 68 degrees. The backup diesel generators are tested every single Friday at noon without fail, and I am making exactly double my old salary. Yesterday morning, an automated Google alert popped up on my phone. Apex Colocation officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy liquidation. The civil penalties from the state fire code violations and the breach of contract lawsuits had completely wiped out the company's remaining assets. Marcus had to sell his house in Austin just to cover the legal fees. As for Julian, his MBA did not help him much in the real world. He is currently out on bail, awaiting his criminal trial. The district attorney is aggressively pursuing the felony forgery and government record tampering charges. Given the severe nature of the safety violations, they are not offering him a plea deal. He is looking at a minimum of 3 years in a state penitentiary. I locked my phone and set it face down on my desk. Through the thick glass of my office window, I could hear the faint, steady roar of 2,000 server fans spinning in unison on the main floor. It was a constant physical hum that rattled your teeth. I smiled, closed my eyes for a second, and listened to the sound of the world turning exactly the way it should.